Back in the year 1345, during the height of Scythia's sack of Asia, which would continue for another 13 years, and with Parthia caught up in the midst of a brutal civil war, the West saw the Fourth Crusade enter its epilogue. Vragoi Scarnic Verzalid, that iron-fisted despot of Satanic Pyria, who had ascended the throne in 1316 at the age of 50, and brought his realm back from the brink of crisis by way of hard-nosed political realism, was dying. Indeed, he had reached the venerable age of 79 and had been steadily losing his mind over the prior year. He had spent his 29 years in power punishing corruption with death, judging generals, officers, and commanders by their performance in battle, and not by their blind loyalty to the crown or its dogmas, investing in defenses for large cities across the realm, sometimes financed by selling off pieces of his own palace, and even established an institution of public education for state-run orphanages, with the plan that they'd eventually enter the service of the crown as literate professionals with lifelong loyalty. His leadership kept Pyria alive through a war of unimaginable magnitude and intensity, with the entire continent bearing down on him. The League of the Storm Cross did not want peace. They wanted unconditional surrender, and even with Pyria having lost some land under his rule, it still, nonetheless, stood. But, for all his leadership qualities, there is one thing he failed to do, and that was leave an heir. When he passed on June 6, 1345, there was no son, no daughter, no brother or uncle or cousin or aunt to take his place. Not even a wife was there to act as regent, as she took her own life the year before. And so, this not only meant the succession was in flux, but also that the Verzalid dynasty had been extinguished. This would be a suboptimal state of affairs for any kingdom, but this was an especially dire situation for Pyria, because of the fact that the Vragoi was both the head of state and the head of the Temple of the Dragon. Furthermore, while one could replace a king, one couldn't replace the Vragoi, as succession for the highest religious office in the land required descent from Theovrasi's Verzalid in some fashion. If you did not have Verzalid blood, you could not ascend the office, and now there were none such living who held that blood in their veins. As such, while this did trigger about a dozen suicides in the court, they managed to keep Scarnic's death a secret for some days by sealing the palace, and summoning all the Veshkops and all the heresiarchs in the land to the Second Demonic Council, an invitation sent out under the forged name of Scarnic himself. As the guests arrived to the capital city of Zoliam and entered the royal palace, it was sealed by the devout palace guard, and none were allowed to enter or to leave before a decision was reached on the next Vragoi. This was immediately scandalous, and there was fear and uproar that permeated the crowd. In the first week, as all the most powerful people in Pyria were essentially placed under house arrest, nobody could come to any agreements, and, far from deciding on a Vragoi for the good of Satanic Pyria, dozens made their own cases for why they should hold the office, and sectarian lines were drawn which would prove to endure for much longer than the Second Demonic Council. The Temple of the Dragon, up until now, operated in a very centralized and top-down fashion, with little bureaucracy or official side channels. The Vragoi, who was both king and high priest, inherited his position instantaneously by right of blood and seniority, with the power to call demonic councils, appoint Veshkops, and defrock or excommunicate others at will. The Veshkops were given similar levels of control over their particular regions, where they appointed and sacked Rifti, administered churches, and were the primary source of doctrinal authority for most affairs. Now, however, there was no Vragoi, and, under the current system, there could be no Vragoi. Things had to change if the Temple of the Dragon were to survive. As such, The two camps which cropped up in response to this now proposed radical alterations to how the temple operated. On one side, you had the Masotemun branch, meaning teacher temple. The Masotemun branch believed that any sufficiently qualified clergyman could become the Vragoi, and that the Vragoi should be elected by a council of Veshkops called the Bula. This system of election would ensure a smooth transition of power every time, regardless of successions or interruptions. As the Bula elected Vragoi from wherever they pleased, be it from their own rank, the family of the prior Vragoi, or even from the general population, whoever secured the most votes from the Bula would become the next Vragoi, and then that Vragoi would hold his traditional powers of temple and government, free to appoint and fire Veshkops as he saw fit. Their argument is that the Great Accuser, the Dragon of Ages, Satan himself, would guide their collective judgment and invest them with unholy wisdom and authority. However, the other faction, known as the Sirutemun branch, opposed them in their entirety. The Sirutemun branch, their name meaning Blood Temple, held firm that the office of Vragoi could only be held by a blood descendant of Theovrasis, the prophet of their religion, who spoke face to face with the Dragon of Ages and received the Moonlight Revelation. That moment is from which the Vragoi receive their authority to rule, pass down the right of their blood. As such, the Sirutemun branch believed that a promised Vragoi will one day return to lead the faith in perfect power and potency as the prophesied Antichrist, a true blood descendant of Theovrasis who will destroy the Creator God and whose number will be that of a man, 666. They back this up with Hebrew gematria, where the phrase true blood Pyria has the value of 666. It is unclear if he will be born one day and reveal himself, or if he lives among the masses as an immortal, or if he will ascend from hell as a metaphysical combination of all past Vragoi. In any case, until then, the Sirutemun branch maintains that the office of Vragoi should remain vacant for its rightful master. In the meantime, the faith should be administered by a council of 13 Veshkops called the Kashilla, with new members appointed by the Kashilla as old members die or are removed, with this Kashilla having the authority over the rest of the Veshkops. The 13 Veshkops which make up the Kashilla take on a new, higher title, shedding their title of Veshkop and becoming a Kashillite. As such, the Sirutemun branch believes that the kingdom and the temple should be run by the 13 Kashillites of the Kashilla, which would hold the power and execute the authority of the vacant office of the Vragoi until the Antichrist's promised arrival. This meant that the Sirutemun branch took on a much more messianic and apocalyptic character. Over the course of the Second Demonic Council, which lasted 3 weeks in total, there were about 14 murders carried out between these two camps. Ultimately, the situation at hand was deemed too dire and required the guiding hand of a singular, absolute monarch as soon as possible. As such, the Masotemun branch won out, the Bula was established, and they elected a woman named Bersena Dardanora, a niece of the famed heresiarch known as the Grandfather, who referred to herself as the Serpent Queen. Vragoi Dardanora, as soon as she was elected, commanded the arrest and execution of everybody in the Sirutemun branch. This led to immediate chaos, and many of them broke out and fled, establishing a base of power in the north and west, plunging Pyria into a de facto state of civil war, and, furthermore, schism. The Sirutemun branch established their Kashillite council, and resisted the power of the Serpent Queen by calling their loyal forces to their smaller region, and refusing to obey her commands or participate in the defense of Pyria in the Fourth Crusade, bothering only with their own survival by turning their own lands into a fortress, as armies meant to be spread across 3 fronts decided to consolidate into one singular area. This was when the collapse began. The heresiarchs no longer united, the remaining loyalists stretched thin, all commanded by a Vragoi disconnected from reality and making demands of everybody around her that did little more than serve her ego, the front began to crumble. The Lethalitors deftly outmaneuvered the border forces and broke open their great walled cities by way of brute force, such was their numbers and zeal. Even the heathens to the north moved in on Cashulite territory, driving them south despite their greater concentration of men. What would happen next would be the purview of the brave and the bold. Will the dark heart of Satanic Pyria continue to beat in the European interior against all odds, or will the stormy cross pierce the very heart of the devil and cast him down like lightning?